Well, hello, 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 everybody. It's so good to be back. And we are absolutely excited to be here because I get to hang with one of my favorite people, Dr. Sharina Rice. Sharina, how are you doing this morning?
I am pretty fantastic.
And why are you so fantastic?
I had some coffee and everything became amazing.
Isn't it amazing what caffeine can do to our adenosine receptors? It's pretty remarkable, is it not?
Mhm.
Yeah. Sharina, I know that you and I have done these before, but I think one thing that would be really informative for our crowd and for our audience is to tell everybody a little bit about yourself. So I clearly know a decent amount about you, but it'd be nice to do introductions because I know people have seen you and I know they've heard a bit about you, but it'd be nice to kind of hear your story to start off. So do you want to go ahead and just take it away and tell everybody a little bit about you and what makes you wake up in the morning and get after your coffee?
All right, I'm a lot of things. I'm a neuroscientist. I work in the world of startups. And what gets me up in the morning is this sense of, well, I get to work with fantastic people on wonderful types of projects, from things in Nobody Studios to things at my main job, which is still in a stealth startup. And also living in the Bay Area, there's a lot of sun. And even though it rained a ton earlier this year, this meant that the hills became really green.
Wow. Well, is that rare for it to be like that?
Yeah, normally it's rather dry and crunchy.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm happy that things are green for you out there. Things are quite green for me in London as well too, but we're used to the rain here, so sounds like a different conversation for you. What Sharina also did not mention is that she's also a absolute social butterfly, and I swear that she knows everybody. She's also quite a good writer as well too, and so you can see some of her work floating around the internet. Sharina, I think at one point you also told me that you created a piece of artwork that maybe is going out to space or has gone to space. Is that accurate?
This is true. And well, I talked about that in the last one that we did.
Lovely. Well, some people may not have remembered that, but do you want to tell us a little bit about how that actually happened? 'Cause I think it's a really interesting story.
Ah, okay. What happened there was we, well, in the Hollow Art Collective, which we call Hollow Art now, we we have this collaboration of artists, and they are around the world, and we do some co-creations of art, and we have our own creations of art. Some of our own creations of art, they've gone over to space, to the ISS via a NASA SpaceX cargo mission.
Amazing. And so it's actually in space right now as we speak.
Well, it's already been beamed.
Got you. Got you. Well, so technically speaking, could we say that part of you is in space?
A part of my mind is in space.
Which is quite exciting. So thank you for that, Sharina. Um, I'll go ahead and just do a quick intro too. And I know that people may or may not have seen us before, but my name is Dr. Eric Reese. I am the Director of Health and Wellness at Nobody Studios, and I'm one of the co-founders as well. And what gets me up in the morning is the persistent urge and drive to not only see how far I can push myself, but how many people that we can help. And I think one thing that has been exciting about the conversations that I've had with Sharina and all the other brilliant minds at the studio is that we get to build companies and wake up every day and try and help people out. And whether that's specifically in health and wellness, or it's fintech or real estate or Web3 blockchain, I mean, the list goes on with how many verticals we're playing in. But one of the best parts about what I get to do every day is I get to meet amazing minds like Sharina's. And as Sharina and I have all these awesome conversations offline, we kind of just started thinking, well, why don't we start doing this more often online and talking to people? And so this is kind of the basis for why we kind of came to the conclusion of having a peak performance LinkedIn live, our social media event live. And Sharina was, of course, the one to come up with the theme "Pick Our Brains About Brains." We're both just a bunch of nerds who love neuroscience, and it's kind of one of those things where we've realized that there are sometimes things that people think they know, and sometimes things that people actually don't know about the brain. And so some of the core theses at Nobody Studios are really leveled on the foundation of the fact that we really believe in precision and individualized medicine and building companies to help people live a healthier life. And so, Sharina, one of the first topics that I kind of wanted to bring up to you and kind of get your intake on, and I can follow up after this, is what is your take on health and wellness, and why health and wellness?
My take on it is that it is really hard to parse through information unless you have a background in biomedicine,
Mm-hmm.
because there are all of these words that can seem to make sense and logical reasonings that can seem to make sense. But if you don't even know what to ask in the first place, well, first of all, there's a ton of jargon. And then secondly, there is a ton of reasonings that seem to make sense on the surface, but doesn't actually add up when it comes to the system.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that is, right? So there was this whole kind of thought early on that the internet would have so much information available to us and help everybody, be knowledgeable and experts in their space. And why do you think people do have this confusion and this period of really not knowing what's true and what isn't true?
I think that's partly because there is a lot of ambiguity,
Yeah.
even in some matters of science itself. For instance, when it comes to, let's say, factors of nutrition, that is such a hard field. And it seems that one year butter is good for you, the next year butter is going to give you a heart attack, the next year butter
Yeah.
is okay for you in certain contexts, the next year butter is the best thing that you can put into coffee, and so on and so forth. And so there is this question of what do we do with all of this uncertainty? And well, sometimes we don't even know
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the conflicting information.
Well, and I think you bring up a relevant point. One, I'm seeing a common coffee theme here, so noted on that. But two, I think that is very difficult, especially for the average person who maybe doesn't have a background in medicine to read the studies, dig into them, the nuances, and then the messages that are being told. There's even moments where a research article comes out, and all of a sudden the publicity around it is completely different than what like the conclusion of the article actually was in the first place, or even the conclusion of the article wasn't actually justified from the actual data that was presented inside the article. And so it's quite difficult, right? And you being someone who's gone through and gotten their postdoctoral thesis, you defended it, and you've done all of that. I mean, about research almost more than anybody else does, right?
Well, I did a doctoral thesis. I didn't do a postdoc.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So you're with your doctoral thesis, right? So, um, it is interesting getting into health and wellness as well too, because we've had multiple discussions about this. You know, Medicine is very different than health and wellness when it comes to regulation, barriers to entry, things along those lines. And it's not saying that we wouldn't go down that path or we won't go down that path at some point. But when you go down like the medicine route, right? So if you wanted to create a new biomedical product or go down pharma, there's a lot of 510K clearances you have to go through with the FDA. There's a lot of HIPAA compliance. There's a lot of, more barriers to entry. And those are there for a really good reason. And so one of the reasons why we're also heavily focused on health and wellness is that one, we don't have to, be as keen of looking through those barriers of entry, but two, we can release products quicker and help more people out with that. At some point, they kind of mesh inevitably, because most of the time, companies, when they go through the health and wellness route, they end up going through the medical route, and that is something that we're passionate about too. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit maybe about, like some of the things that you've seen and some of the things maybe that you like about the health and wellness space, and maybe even some of the things that you don't like about the health and wellness space, because I have opinions on both of those sides. And I'm sure people listening to this too have opinions on both of those sides as well. So I'd love to hear your take, because I know we can, probably share a little bit back and forth on that.
Yeah. Well, my take on this is that my primary job, it is very much in the regulated medical space, and I'm glad that it is, partly because if people have navigated through that well, then it means that they have some defensibility for what they're producing, especially when it comes to things where they are the first to build that innovation, or they are the first to get it through the FDA. Then they can start doing things like setting standards and the general narrative around that new field. Now, when it comes to health and wellness, well, more in the wellness space, wellness, it's not as regulated, and the FDA doesn't review these things. And yet, I think that people still need to be careful about what kinds of claims their wellness device can do. Because even if it works for, let's say, the subset of users whom it was tested on, there is this question of, well, how was that tested? Was it rigorously tested in a scientific way? Or was it more of you did a taste test on various coffees at home and you found that there is this one that seems to make people generally feel more alert?
Fair. Yeah. Well, and of course, with all of that being said, I saw a new app or a new product that came out in the sleep space where it's like this mat you put underneath your pillowcase, and it sends energy or wavelengths of different chemicals like melatonin and serotonin. And so, first, I have so many questions about how they were able to get the energy and the wavelength of serotonin and melatonin. But you have all of these different, we'll say testimonials from people who've used the product, right? And they have like 9,000 followers on their social media page. And it's a classic example again of, does the science and the research back that up? I have yet to see an article talk about that. And maybe I'm mistaken and maybe I'm uneducated on that. But there can be a lot of things in this space. And regardless if people buy them or not, that they have different claims that they can tout. And like you had mentioned, the FDA doesn't necessarily regulate that. It's the same with the supplement industry. It's the same with a lot of things in the health and wellness space in general. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are, it's all bad things, because there are some really beneficial and really cool things in that space. It's just you have to be very careful and you have to be a very informed consumer. And I think sometimes people can get taken a bit. And I know you're laughing a bit, Sharina, because I'm sure that you've seen your fair share of things that have come out where you're like, this doesn't necessarily make sense neurologically. And so I have moments where I scratch my head as well to say, I think maybe we could do better than where we're at this point.
I also think that when it comes to mental wellness, for instance, that there are probably millions of ways for people to relax. Some people relax by walking their dog, but is that a wellness treatment? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that is for certain people, and to other people it may stress them out. And for some people, well, eating a meal very mindfully will help them, and for other people then that may not do the trick. And so there is this question of, okay, how do you find what works for you for that kind of thing? I think
Fair.
that it's a lot of experimentation, and in a sense you have to kind of create your individualized your individualized thing, because it's your life.
Fair. Well, that is the truth, right? One therapy for somebody could be complete torture for the other, right? And so, kind of alluding and taking on to kind of the next talking point, which is that you mentioned the word individualize, and I think that there's been a lot of talk about individualized medicine and precision medicine. There's a couple articles that we've written recently that we're going to be publishing through Nobody Studios and a couple platforms, just talking about why we are focused on individualized medicine and precision medicine. And really, what does this term mean? Well, individualized and precision medicine really are talking about how we are now looking at genetics. We are now looking at epigenetics, which is the integration layer on top of your genome. You're no longer limited by your genetics. Your genetics kind of metaphorically load the gun. The environment can pull the trigger. Well, what does that environment really entail? It's your habits, it's your sleep, it's your exercise, it's your nutrition, it's your psychological well-being. All of these things really have an effect on the genes we switch on and off. And so, looking into precision medicine and individualized medicine, we're quite keen on investigating this and building in this space, and whether that's novel molecules and therapeutics, whether that's individualized nutrition programs, how specific we can and can't be with those is still to be determined. But it's kind of an exciting space to treat, Sharina the way Sharina needs to be treated and wants to be treated, to treat, Eric the way he needs to be treated and wants to be treated. It's really tailoring treatments and protocols to individuals. And that can involve integrating, wearable technologies. It can involve different aspects like genetic testing. It can involve different aspects of even looking at like the gut microbiome. The list kind of goes on. And it's kind of an exciting time for this, integrative, individualized medicine space, because there are a lot of people who are really looking for it, and asking a lot of really good questions in it. So, Sharina, for you, I know you're not, actively building in this space, but I'm curious about, like, is there anything out there right now that's really exciting you in the individualized space? In the 90s, everybody was excited about mapping out the human genome. And then we did that. And genetic tests cost thousands of dollars. And now you can run a 23andMe panel for like less than $100. So I'm curious if there's anything that you've noticed recently or anything that you've looked into. You're like, oh, this is interesting, or this could be really helpful for people when they're dealing with this sort of ailment or problem.
Let's see. The first thing that comes to mind is band. Because, well, I was a band geek for many years, about a decade. And, well, it seemed that playing music, it helped a lot of people who were in the
Mhm.
band, not just in terms of bonding socially, but also in terms of, well, often they're breathing together, and they're making some sort of creative expression there. And so that's kind of how I think of it, as individualized. I wasn't meant to play, let's say, a a trumpet. That is like the opposite instrument of me.
Fair.
But to some people, it is very therapeutic.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. What what else comes to mind? I think that, yeah, brain data, it is kind of interesting as well. There are lots of confounds, though. I mean, when it comes to measuring from brains, for instance, it's hard to parse out the signal from the noise, and to make sure that the signal actually is coming from the brain rather than the muscles in the head or some other kind of thing. And
Yep.
so I am looking forward to a future when it is easier to collect brain data ambiently, but also responsibly, and in a context where people can make sense of their own data rather than, say, have their attention spied on.
Do you think there's a future with like quantitative EEG, and utilizing those technologies to help people not only assess their brains and the integrity of different areas of the brain, kind of like mapping out a real estate map, but also to using that for like neurofeedback and trying to, increase different frequencies in different lobes of the brain? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's kind of remarkable that neurofeedback, it's a thing that has been shown to work for many years, but the thing is that I don't really know very many people who own a neurofeedback device.
Sure. Yeah.
But in a sense, also, it can be a matter of controlling heart rate, and a person can measure that with their watch.
Yeah.
So there comes the question of which kind of signal is going to give the truthiest truth to solve the problem that the person wants to solve.
Fair. Well, there's also a component of it too, where, what sort of, software capabilities and measurements, and what are we truly looking for, right? We think we know, but brains have a interesting way of keeping us honest. And, speaking of brains, there's been a lot of discussions about AI and integration in healthcare, health and wellness, the medical system, and software and data. I'd love to get kind of your take on, first, maybe if you could just help the viewers understand what is AI. I think it's always this big mystical thing that seems very like, epihuman, right? Above, like far above us, but it's really not, because it was created by us. And so if you could just kind of maybe give everybody a little understanding of what AI is in your opinion, and then where you think it's promising, where you think maybe it's going to be limited in the healthcare space, health and wellness, and kind of just in medicine in general. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, artificial intelligence, it is, in a sense, a calculator. That's how I think of it almost, but a calculator that learns as it goes. So there is this matter of machine learning of, okay, we're going to take a whole bunch of data, feed it to a machine, and it's going to fit some sort of thing by noticing patterns about it. And with that pattern, we're going to create more things, let's say with generative AI, for taking that lot of data and then making new data from it based on some sort of prompt, and also based on former data that has been fed into it and the way that it's been trained. And then when it comes to the field of medicine, I think that it's going to be used for drug discovery quite a bit, as well as in generating healthcare records. But there is this caveat of, where are humans in the loop, and how do we prevent these things from being held over our responsibility?
Sure.
So, for instance, if a robot causes a problem, then who is responsible for that? Let's say that it gave an incorrect answer about a patient's diagnosis. There is that question of who's responsible, and who should we point a blame at? Should we say that it's the fault of a doctor who used it and didn't sanity check it well enough? Should we say that it's because of the company that produced that artificial intelligence, and this is the 0.01% that algorithm got wrong? Or is there some other thing? And so I think that sanity checking is going to become more of a factor, as well as what we do with our responsibility, and how it's kind of elevated as humans who may not have to deal with as much writing ourselves, or as much thinking about the general pattern ourselves, but rather being able to dive deep and investigate more.
Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to be a part of some interesting discussions in this space, and there are a lot of people who are really worried that AI is going to replace doctors or medical providers. And I have yet to see any evidence that that will be the case. Not for the next 10, 20, 30 years, to be fair. Maybe it does at some point, but not tomorrow. A lot of the discussions have really been around how we can utilize and deploy AI to essentially like be your co-pilot, right? Your wingman or wingwoman, to help you make decisions, augment some of the clerical work, and to help you really improve your efficiency at whatever task it's going to be. But at the end of the day, like you said, Sharina, I really believe that you're still going to need somebody, aka a human, to really oversee what's coming out of that, right? So there's that classic study, there's a classic case that came out. This was recently where they had lawyers who just put in and tried to come up with, I forget the story, it was either a complaint or some sort of briefing where they used ChatGPT 4, and the ChatGPT 4 just completely hallucinated cases to justify their claim, and it was just completely ripped apart, as it should have been. You need to do your due diligence with this, and while these large language models are really interesting and they have billions of data points, you have to remember that quantity is very different than quality. And so, although they have massive amounts of data that they've been trained on, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be accurate with what they come back with. Even though we have a couple sentences or a paragraph or 500 words that sound logical, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're factual. And some of the people that I've been speaking to now have been talking about how we have these open AI large language models, but at some point in time in the future, there will be these really, really small data point language models that'll be really specific for healthcare or legal law, or specific sectors and areas that will be really, really quality sourced where the information and data is coming from. And I look forward to those days because even to say medicine, for instance, the medical literature doubles every like 72 days at this point in time. That statistic came from a individual who works quite high up at Microsoft in their healthcare space. He did a lecture in London about 4 weeks ago. And I think it's so amazing to think about how much reading you would have to do to try and even keep up with that, let alone implement it into practice, have time for your personal life and whatnot. And I think that these large language models can help us augment some clerical work and make our lives easier, especially as providers, right? Providers spend a third to a half of their time now, working on and performing, notes, and it's taking away from their ability to work with patients. So I think it's unfortunate and sad, but Sharina, where do you sit on the spectrum of optimistic to doomsday with regards to AI and large language models? I'm curious to get your take on that.
Let's see. I think that they are useful, and that they are practically the homework machine that I always wished for when I was in high school. I mean, when my parents asked me what I wanted for a gift, then I would say a homework machine, because there was so much homework of, oh, find quotes that say this in this paper, and just leafing through things and searching. But these kinds of things, they're not actually considered skills anymore,
Yeah.
because there's this digital world of just being able to find them with a computer. And so when it comes to creating more things, I think that it will require humanity to indeed think deeper about things, be able to question things more, but also to be more skeptical in general,
Yeah.
because a lot of these hallucinations of artificial intelligence, they are very convincing.
It's true.
Sometimes hilariously convincing. And so there comes questions of what happens with fake news, what happens with what we think about reality, and what we do with them. When I post things on the social medias, I try specifically to post things that cannot have been done by artificial intelligence, or they would have been extremely difficult to do with artificial intelligence, such as that I went to some event and I met some people there, and that they have some sort of community.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, because these large language models don't actually know what they're saying or what they're putting out. They just recognize patterns. They look at different types of sequencing and phrasing, and then they just say, here's what I've seen in the past. Here's what probably makes the most sense. And so while they can be convincing, it does not necessarily mean that they're logically correct. They can't think like us. And that's why I'm more on the spectrum of I'm optimistic about the technology in the future that it entails, because I do think it will be able to optimize our daily lives. It's essentially like you having, a small assistant, a virtual assistant who can do a lot of tasks for you that you don't necessarily want to do, right? Scheduling, maybe writing emails, doing follow-up, things like that. But it's not going to take away from the ability of your brain to be able to be creative and have a full-length discussion and really, learn and logically put things together to be creative and innovative. And so I'm skeptically optimistic. I'm hopeful, and I hope that the good outweighs the bad in all senses of that. So as we wrap up our time here, Sharina, I'm curious if there's anything that you want to leave anybody with, as far as something that you've recently learned, something that you're excited about, or something that's been on your mind as of recent.
Yeah, one thought that I have is that we, as scientists or physicians, we need to have a lot of intellectual humility, in a sense. Because if it was found, well, if we were always right, then of course it would be kind of known that biomedical scientists and physicians, they live substantially longer than the rest of the population. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Unfortunately not.
And similarly, economists, well, if they were always right, or they were generally right, then they would be substantially wealthier than the general population. But that doesn't seem to be the case either. And so, yeah, I think that it's a matter of continuing to learn and to stay curious.
Yeah. Well, and I think the humility aspect is massively important. There's a great book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. And in that book, it essentially talked about our human biases and how we, at all points throughout our lifetimes, are always trying to reduce this thing called cognitive dissonance, which means I have a belief, I've presented with something new, with information that maybe refutes a belief of mine. Our brains are always trying to logically connect that gap and justify why we feel a specific way. And so I think we can all take a little bit of a slice of that humble pie and really benefit humanity by maybe even admitting maybe when we are wrong and changing our viewpoints. So, um, Sharina, as always, love hanging out with you. It's always fun to be able to have these discussions. Sharina and I are going to start changing up some formatting and modifying some things as we move forward. So open to feedback. For some reason, this was not able to be posted on LinkedIn Live. So we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and we're on Twitter, but I will post this on LinkedIn for everybody else to take a look at. And comments, questions, things like that, we're always open to them because Sharina and I are always learning as well too. So once again, thanks everybody for joining us. And we appreciate you taking the time to come hang with us. And we'll see you on the next one.